Okay, we're going to start this video out with the end. This is the 352 back on the engine stand. You can see it's a little dirty. It was a little dirty when I put it on the dyno and got it a little bit dirtier while I was on there. So going to give it a little bit of a bath and a little bit of touch up before it goes back in the box and it can go off to Joel Little. We're all done with the dyno runs. Motor runs really good. Pretty happy with it. I think Joel will be happy with it. So let's jump back into the dyno runs and I'll show you what we did. Okay, this is the first run back on the dyno, 352 with the top end all back together. Has the electron carb on it, the Bill's pipe, the KX ignition. We're just going to do a light run. We're going to start at 4,500 RPM. We're only going to pull it up to 7,600 RPM. Just to make sure everything's good, see what it can do. The carb has not been jetted at all, so I know that the jetting is going to be a long ways off, but we're going to give it a quick pull and see what it does. Okay, so here's the results of our first dyno run. This is unjetted. You can see the EGTs are barely reading towards the end of the run. It was barely starting to climb a little bit. So it's way too rich. Timing's a little bit retarded, it looks like, as well. And so what you can see in this chart is a fair amount of oscillation as the RPMs go up and down. That's partially the motor trying to produce horsepower and clean out. Partially it's a dyno setup. But as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, out of the gate, just put back together, not jetted, not timing set. It made 56.88 raw horsepower at the crankshaft. Now, the dynamometer measures torque, and it measures RPM, and then it calculates the horsepower based on that, and it gives you the raw data. We have to, in order for the data to be any good, we have to compensate for the temperature and the barometric pressure and the humidity. Right now, since this is winter, it's very cold out here. It's about 52, 54 degrees when I made this run. The other thing to recognize is that this was what we would call a cold shot. The motor was not up to temperature. It was about 80 degrees water temperature at the end of the run, which is very cold. I try and do most of my runs between 100 and 140, as close to 120 to 140 as I can keep them. But, you know, in the wintertime, they definitely run cooler. So we're going to go calculate this and run the correction factors. And then we'll show you what that actually looks like in corrected horsepower. Okay, here's our first run after the dyno's been corrected for temperature and elevation and humidity. Gives us a little bit different view of what's going on in the motor with a bit more detail. You can see the run started at 4,500 RPM. When the power valve started to open, there was a dip right at 5,000 RPM. That's very common for Tecate 4 motors or Tecate 3 motors or even KX 250 motors when there's not enough fuel or not enough draw from the pipe when the power valve opens. In this particular case, it's lean on the bottom, so we had a drop when the motor wanted more fuel as the power valve opened. And you can also see that there's a couple of little spikes just below 5,500 and just above 5,500. Those are from lean misfires where the motor actually didn't fire because it was so lean, but then it fired in the pipe, which is why you got the two spikes in the exhaust temp. Exhaust temp's pretty low at the beginning of the run. It starts to build towards the end of the run, but really it's pretty rich on temperature. And you can see after compensation, our actual measured horsepower on a standard day, 29.92 inches of mercury and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, is corrected to 54.66 horsepower at 7750 RPM. Considering that a stock Tecate 4 motor on this dyno will make between 30 and 32 horsepower day after day after day, most of them are pretty consistent 31, 32 horsepower. You can see that we've taken a 32 horsepower motor and bumped it up more than 20 horsepower. So this isn't even dialed in. It's a big jump in horsepower, and you can see the torque's pretty good. We'll do a couple of tweaks with the jetting. First, we're going to bump up the ignition timing a couple degrees. We're going to lean it down on the top and give it some more fuel on the bottom and make another run. Okay, here's our run after we did some jetting. We didn't change anything else on the motor, except we gave it a couple more degrees of ignition timing. We gave it some more fuel on the bottom end, and we took a little bit of fuel away on the top end. You can see that this run, I only ran it up to 6,700 RPM because I could see the EGTs were really low and the motor was starting to gurgle a little bit because it was rich on top. But this is a really good indication, or kind of demonstrates how well or how much jetting affects the performance of your motor. You can see how this pull really flattened out quite a bit. There's still the 5,000 RPM dip. That's telling me that the power valves are still opening a little bit too early. But adding more fuel on the bottom end took the motor from 45.1 horsepower at 6,600 RPM up to 51.8 horsepower at the same RPM. So you can see the mid-range power jump dramatically at everything from about 5,000 to 6,600 RPM just by adding some more fuel on the bottom end. I'm going to try and add some more fuel and see if I can't get that 5,000 RPM dip to go away, but I'm pretty sure that's mechanical at this point. The motor's pulling pretty well, but the EGTs are still a little low. So I'm going to try and put a little bit more fuel in it, but I think that 5,000 RPM dip is power valves opening a little bit early. So let's make a jet change and see what we can get, and we'll probably pull it a little bit longer. All right, we made a couple more passes on the 352. We leaned down the jetting on the top quite a bit. Got it to pull pretty clean, got some decent EGTs, gave it a little bit more fuel on the bottom end, but that dip at 5,000 RPM is just as bad, if not worse. It gets much worse as the pipe temperature goes up, which is a little bit to be expected. The power valves are opening at the time that I want the power valves to open. So I'm going to try a couple of things to get a better signal out of the pipe. Getting an improved signal out of the pipe is going to create more scavenging in the cylinder. It essentially creates a better draw of the fuel from the bottom up to the top end. So adding more fuel doesn't make the dip go away. It just makes it get rich. I need to get more charge up into the top end and get more density to get that flat spot to go away. I really don't want to open the power valves later if I can avoid it, because then I'll get rid of the dip, but I'll have a flat spot. I'm going to do a modification to the head pipe on the Bill's pipe. It's going to go from 1.75 inches coming out of the motor, and it'll taper up to 2 inches where it connects into the first diverging cone of the pipe. That increase will allow it to flow better. It'll also give it a much better signal from the diverging cone. Normally, we don't want to do that because it reduces, or potentially can reduce, the velocity of the fuel in the head pipe. But considering how big the bore is on this motor and how much exhaust area that I have, I think I'm okay on velocity. I just need to get a bigger signal. So we'll go ahead and cut the pipe and give that a try. If the pipe doesn't do it at all, or it doesn't do it enough, I'll give it some more timing, but I think maybe the pipe's going to do what I want it to do. So we'll cut the pipe and then we'll make a run. We're going to go ahead and run this pipe mod. This is a Bill's pipe. You can see that from here all the way back up to here. I've replaced this section of pipe with a larger diameter, but it's still a tapered head pipe. And I've remade the coupler up there so that it fits the port a little bit better. This pipe's a little, this is a perfect pipe for 250, but we're getting up a little bit big for this pipe. So we're going to go ahead and run that with that pipe mod and see how it likes it. Okay, here's our last run with the Bill's pipe. Same Electron carburetor, ignition timing a couple degrees advanced over stock. You can see we gave it some more fuel on the bottom end, and that big dip at 5,000 RPM, been able to get rid of. It's pulling right up through that pretty nice now. EGTs are pretty good. They're very, very safe down in the 5,000 to 6,000 RPM range, and they climb nice and steady throughout the RPM range. We were able to pull it all the way up to 8,600 RPM, but it really stopped making horsepower at 8,159, so basically 8,200 RPM, which is really good because this pipe, the Bill's pipe, doesn't typically like to make horsepower past 8,000 RPM. But the bigger head pipe mod that we did allowed it to pull a couple hundred extra RPM. And you can see in the bottom right-hand figure that after corrections for elevation, temperature, and humidity, we were able to pull 61.65 horsepower out of this 352cc motor. So we didn't quite hit double what the factory horsepower is, because that would have been 64 horsepower. But you can see basically going up 100 cc's in displacement with the motor mods. We're right at 62 horsepower. So that's pretty impressive. We have one other pipe that I want to run on this. I have a late model Clem pipe that I want to put on this and make a run. So the Clem pipe typically makes more mid-range to top-end horsepower than the Bill's pipe. You can see that the beauty of this Bill's pipe is basically anywhere from about 6,500 RPM to 8,500 RPM. We have almost a flat torque line with steadily increasing horsepower, and it's just a really, really smooth, rideable pipe. So if you're a gear too high and you open it up, it pulls through it. If you're geared too low and you run it over into the 85, 8,600 RPM range, even up to 88, it doesn't fall in its face. So it's a pretty nice pipe. So we'll go ahead and do the swap over to the Clem pipe, and then we'll make a couple runs with the Clem pipe and see what it does. Okay, we've made a pipe swap now. We've swapped out the Bill's pipe with the large head pipe to a late model Clem pipe for the T4. This pipe's unmodified. It's got a bigger head pipe than the Bill's did, but not quite as big as the head pipe we put on the Bill's when we modified it. This pipe is bigger in volume. It's larger in diameter here. It's shorter in total tune length, but it does have a nice long converging cone. So we're going to run this one. These tend to like to make horsepower a bit better in the mid to upper end. Probably going to pull a little bit longer than the Bill's. Other than that, the setup's the same Electron carb, same head, same compression, same reeds, same timing. So let's give this thing a run and see what it does. So this is the Clem pipe. I had to do a little bit of a jetting change. I made one run. About halfway through the run, I stopped because it got really hot really fast on the top end. So I gave it a bit more fuel on the top end. I did not touch the bottom end, but it was actually a bit rich on the bottom end with the same jetting. You can see when you're looking at the EGTs around 5,500 RPM, it's kind of cold. That's when when the power valve starts to open, but you can see on the big end, the EGTs were plenty high, about, let's see what we have for EGTs. We had about 1,329 degrees of EGTs at the end, which is 1,350 is about as high as I like to run them. I have run motors higher than that, but that seems to be pretty good. The interesting thing about this is I expected to see more out of this pipe in the 6,500 to 8,000 RPM range. And after doing the head mod on the Bill's pipe, both of these pipes are within a horsepower. In most cases, they're within less than half a horsepower, anywhere between 5,000 and 8,200 RPM. This run ended a little bit early just because I was getting up in the EGTs and I didn't pull it all the way to 8,600 RPM. You can see the horsepower has just started to flatten out about 8,200 RPM, and it would have started dropping after that. I don't expect to have picked up much more than about another half a horsepower if I'd have run it up a little bit higher. But this is with the Clem pipe. You can see both of them are very impressive. They exceeded 60 horsepower on this 352cc motor. All of the runs on the last day were done with 92 octane pump gas, and that is pump gas with ethanol in it directly from the gas station. I try to run these motors with the same thing you guys would go to the gas station and buy, so I use oxygenated fuel with alcohol in it. Two-strokes like the alcohol, it doesn't bother them. So, if you guys want to buy fuel that doesn't have alcohol, that's great. But the alcohol and the fuel, as long as you take care of your fuel and don't let water get in it, it doesn't bother it at all. So you can see this is pretty safe, pretty reliable motor. Pump gas, 40-to-1 with Maxima K2 oil, Electron carburetor, KX250 ignition, 2 degrees advanced. We got decent compression, 180 pounds of compression, and that's it. It's a pretty impressive little motor. So as I wrap this video up, I thought you guys might want to see what a run looks like from my perspective. This is what it looks like when I'm looking at the computer. The cool thing about this Dynamax software is I actually get to replay a run anytime I want, so I can go back and rerun it. This is actually the real-time recording from the last dyno run on the Clem pipe. It actually did a tiny bit better than what I graphed out. You can watch the horsepower numbers up here. You watch the RPM over here, foot-pounds of torque here, and it'll graph all the way up through here. So keep an eye on it, see what it does. It's pretty amazing.
Exhaust temperature over limits.
You can see right at the top there, we got a little higher than I had the limit set on the EGT. And you can see we actually made 62.2 horsepower at 8,400 RPM. That's what I expected the Clem pipe to do, was pull a little bit longer on the top. So when I did pull it up, I got a little bit more than I actually thought I would, but I definitely exceeded the exhaust temp. Didn't hurt the motor. I mean, I set it, pretty tame, but you can see it makes pretty good horsepower. So guys, thanks for watching. I hope you found this interesting. Like always, if you like the content, please hit the subscribe button. Tell all your friends to watch. And the next project is sitting over here on the dyno now. It's going to be this hybrid Tecate 4 motor. It has a late model KX250 top end on it. I believe it's 2001 cylinder. It's 5mm stroker with a 310 bore, so this could be just a little bit smaller than the last motor we ran, but this is going to have more stroke and a smaller bore, where the 352 had a big bore and a short stroke. So it'll be an interesting comparison between the two. So like I said, subscribe, keep watching. Thanks guys. Talk to you later. Bye.